This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
So, going over my notes for the weekend and reading about all the big stories in the wrestling media. Obviously, the biggest story has been centered around the WWE and all the controversy that's been going on with the now former CEO of the company, Vincent K. McMahon. So today we're going to be talking about AEW and the NWA. Got to make sure we're focusing on the more important material, you see. Nah, I kid. I know it's always kind of the cop-out response to say, let's kind of hold off to wait and see how things unfold before we comment. Particularly with what's going on right now with that whole situation, the investigation is still pending. You know, we obviously know some key details to the story, but I think what I would like to do is just save the time to comment on the story in full until there's a little more detail out there. It's a very long discussion anyway, and I obviously don't want to cover it here. With the segments we have on the show for today, maybe if the story broke last week, I'd have a little bit more time to cover it on the Monday podcast, since last week was a really short show anyway. But as noted, I'm going to sort of take some time to collect my thoughts on the whole situation and try to talk about it once we see how things unfold. I obviously have my opinions on the matter at the moment, but like I said, too much ground to cover. We'd be here for another 3 hours, and I just don't have the time and energy to sit here and go that long. So with that said, this is the 5 Starr Wrestling Report for those that may be tuning in for the first time. If it is, and you're watching on YouTube, make sure to subscribe, smash the like button, and make sure to leave a comment to share any insight on the material that we have on today's program. As noted from last Monday's show, I did get a chance to finally sit down and watch the Alwayz Ready pay-per-view in full, so we are going to talk about that today, in addition to the follow-up episode of Powerrr. And we also have Rampage on the docket, which is kind of just more of the same when it comes to that complete waste of an hour. At least now that the playoffs are done, it looks like they're putting in a little more effort than usual. They're actually trying to get more of their B-level stars on there instead of all the D talent we were getting for the last several weeks. And seeing as how we're already kind of grinding into things with AEW, may as well just get that show done and over with so we can move on to the stuff that's worth talking about. I'll at least say this about the opening match. Jon Moxley Wrestling gave them an excuse to do an actual full ring entrance instead of the usual 2 guys already standing in the ring and they ring the bell and they immediately start going a million miles an hour before we even establish who's wrestling in the match to begin with. Reviewing a Moxley match at this point is almost on par with how I review Bucks matches. I know what I'm getting with him. I'm generally not a fan of his ring style, but if I go in with my brain turned off and try not to nitpick anything, it's unquestionably more tolerable than anything the Bucks do in their matches. It was less offensive than the usual Moxley match I see. At least it didn't gig for no reason like he did in that Wheeler Yuta match. I spent a good amount of it mostly listening to it through my Raycons while I was doing other stuff, but I believe I heard something in this match from William Regal on commentary. He said that Zack Sabre Jr. had challenged Bryan Danielson for the Forbidden Door show, which I would totally be down to see. I've always liked Zack's work. You guys that watched my G1 review last year, I talked extensively about how much I liked him in that tournament. And anything with Bryan Danielson, I'm usually on board with. Just as long as it doesn't directly involve anything with the Blackpool Fight Club, because, my God, is that shit horrible. As for Dante, I continue to echo everything I've ever said about him since they teased they were going to turn him heel with Team Taz, but then decided against it for some reason. He can do just about every flashy move in the book, and then some, but as a babyface personality, he's more vanilla than ice cream, and if they ever actually have any hope of making the guy more than generic move guy number 487, he needs more flavor. Now, turning him heel would probably be a nice step, but we've already had this conversation like 5 months ago when they started doing something with Dante, and then Tony got bored with him, so now he's just back to being just another moves guy, like everybody else on their overcrowded roster. They did about 1,400 near falls, reversals, back and forth exchanges. It got old very quickly, and then Mox decked him with a lariat, put him in that hammerlock hold for the submission, and that was that. And speaking of Team Taz, Ricky Starks and Powerhouse Hobbs did a face-off with Keith Lee and Swerve Strickland in the back, and the reality quickly set in after watching it that Starks and Hobbs are not currently the tag team champions. And I was gravely upset. The Gun Club and Max Caster had a 6-man squash, short and concise, absolutely nothing to note about it. Been on record, I like Colton and Austin. The Acclaimed, I can honestly take or leave at this point, but I will admit, Caster's promos are at least offensively entertaining. The NDA joke was a low blow, though. And by the way, I did figure out in the last week that Anthony Bowens being in a wheelchair is not a work, but he is in fact legitimately injured. It would be great to maybe get a video package to explain how that happened, but that would also imply that AEW is good at explaining things. Oh yeah, for the record too, another guy injured. Go figure. I wonder why. Some chick named Willow Nightingale wrestled Jade Cargill for the TBS title. Once again, not a single female in this match with normal colored hair. It was bad. Not a groundbreaking news bulletin. Jade won with the double underhook faceplant, and then Athena showed up on the top rope, completely fucked up her finish on Kiera Hogan, and then immediately ate a boot from Jade. So 3 weeks into her signing with the company, she's already a geek. And I think Chris Statlander ran out for the big save at the end. Whatever. The only good thing here is that it appears Statlander has finally dropped the alien gimmick. And the main event was Darby Allin and Bobby Fish. And as we learned in the pre-tape beforehand, Darby was super pissed about Red Dragon breaking Sting's ankle and putting him on the shelf. So, of course, Darby comes out for this match with Bobby, and what's his first move? He runs into pose on the top rope, which allows for Bobby Fish to run in and clip his knee from behind for the immediate heat. I laughed. Looking past that little quirky spot, it was a fine little match. Only thing I really didn't like about it was all the constant floor brawling. Once again, though, I think I've just come to accept the fact that countouts just don't exist in AEW, even though officials administer the 10 count. It's more like taking the concept of the 10 count and then extending it to about 100. Darby is still in murky waters with me after that complete abomination of a match he had with Jeff Hardy weeks back. I took him to the woodshed for all the stupid shit he did in that match, but Bobby Fish is a pro, so I knew he wasn't going to be taking a lot of Darby's usual reckless offense. I continue to maintain that Darby won't even be around much longer than 3 to 5 years in the business, especially if he keeps taking the bumps he's taken now. The apron bumps, constantly falling on his head and neck, ramming himself into guardrails at full speed. I mean, we wonder why everyone's getting injured all the time. And I get it's the gimmick, and he's been on record saying that his goal is to deliberately brutalize his body and go out there and practically try to kill himself at any cost. I don't know why this would be your life's mission in any profession, even in pro wrestling, but, Darby is also part of that fucked up Gen Z culture, so probably shouldn't come as a shock to me. And I do apologize to any Gen Zers out there that are actual sane human beings, but yeah, you guys are a strange bunch. Can't say I identify with a lot of you guys. Finish was good. Darby countering Fish's heel hook and then stacking him up for the Last Supper. And the afterbirth was awesome, I have to admit. Honestly, made this entire show worth the watch just for the last 3 minutes of the entire program. Partially because there was a level of hilarity to it that made it ridiculous, but also because I am still kind of a mark for him because I grew up watching him. We did get the return of Sting! Yeah, Bobby holding Darby down in the ring to call for Kyle O'Reilly to come out with a chair. So, of course, Kyle's meandering and sauntering down to the ring comically slow. He was actually doing a little bit of Seth Rollins' freaking strut that everyone raves about. Gesticulating, air guitaring with the chair. Only thing that was missing was the ridiculous swimming antics. But of course, he gets about halfway down the ramp when the lights go out. And when they come back on, Sting just appears like The Undertaker at the bottom of the ramp with his trench coat and baseball bat. And of course, O'Reilly and Fisher just standing there shit in their pants. And the comedy bit comes in when O'Reilly goes to swing the chair at Sting, but Sting catches it, and he literally sticks his bat into O'Reilly's groin. And it's completely preposterous because all O'Reilly basically did was trap the bat in between his legs, but the timing of it was so well done, it actually kind of looked like Sting impaled the bat through his groin and then out of his asshole. And O'Reilly sort of like he'd just been forcibly castrated. And while O'Reilly's selling on the ramp, Sting stoically turns to the ring. He hands Darby the chair so he can hit the coffin drop on Fish's ankle. And this is all well done. Great revenge angle. The people pop for Sting's return. And I'll be honest, there are very few programs or matches that I'm actually looking forward to right now in AEW, especially with the absence of MJF or Punk. I am actually kind of looking forward to Sting and Darby versus Red Dragon. If there are 4 guys that I have the confidence can pull off a good tag program, I mean, those guys would be on the list. And yes, I'll even throw Darby in that equation, even if he really isn't my flavor. But it was a great close to the show. And when you completely discount the fact that the show did virtually nothing to promote the Forbidden Door show in less than 2 weeks, it wasn't bad. Of course, we're grading on a scale because it's AEW. But the Sting return was fun, and they went out strong. Like I said, you take what you can get when it comes to this product, and as I mentioned earlier on in the report, without Punk or MJF around, I don't have a whole lot to latch onto right now. Alright, so I am officially 168 hours late to the party on this Alwayz Ready pay-per-view that NWA hosted last weekend. I think that's how many hours are in a week, if my math is correct. And I did watch the show in full over the weekend, minus the YouTube pre-show, because ain't nobody got time for that. Plus, the show was already 4 hours of just main pay-per-view time. So we're going to kind of run down the highlights and the lowlights of the full show. It's probably not going to be the most detailed analysis of the matches, but again, the show happened 7 days ago at the time of this recording. Of course, I'll do my regular collective thoughts when we get to the end. It should firstly be noted that Velvet Sky was back on commentary for the show, unfortunately. And I like Velvet, nothing against her, but her being taken off of commentary for the last set of Powerrr tapings was probably one of the better decisions they've made. Here they put her back with Joe Galli and Tim Storm, and yeah. Let's just say she was not greatly missed by being taken off of commentary duty. Now, she was on the following episode of Powerrr, but my hope is that it won't be an ongoing thing, and she'll make sporadic appearances on commentary, but I guess we'll see going forward. The opener was Aaron Stevens versus Trevor Murdoch. which was kind of one of those under-the-radar feuds that NWA had kind of been featuring on their Powerrr shows. As I've stated many a time now, Aaron Stevens is one of those guys that I run very hot and cold with, depending on how seriously he decides to take his segments. Whenever he decides to act and work like a pro wrestler, I'm all on board with watching him. And whenever he's doing the wacky WWE light comedy stuff, it's a turnoff for me. And the guy can talk. Never said he wasn't incredibly gifted or talented. I just don't care for the kind of sports entertainment side of things he's been involved with. And I think one thing we learned in this match, if there's one thing that wrestling has clearly taught us in the last year or so, shit can go wrong in some of the most unexpected, unimaginable ways. Whether it's Cash Wheeler somehow managing to slice open his arm, getting it caught in the ring hook, or whether it's Bryan Danielson getting his leg trapped between the ring apron and the entrance ramp. Or in the case of this match, there's a spot where Stevens went up to the top rope for some kind of shoulder block onto Trevor, and he somehow managed to get his bootlaces caught on the turnbuckle pad. Could have ended a lot worse than it did, but there was a comedic element to it because when Stevens got his boot stuck, he's basically dangling off of the top rope upside down while trying to unhook his right boot from the pad. And he did come up selling the ankle afterwards. Not entirely sure if that was a work or not, but the spot could have ended a lot more horrifically if he managed to rip up the buckle pad entirely. So thank God he was okay. Trevor won with the top rope bulldog, and then Stevens did the post-match deal where the people were chanting, "Thank you, Aaron," and he said, "You're welcome." So I don't really know what that means. Whether he's going to be hanging up the boots, no pun intended, after just talking about the botched turnbuckle spot. I remember he did that pre-tape on Powerrr with May Valentine where he said something about wanting to travel to Italy or Spain or whatever it was to find himself. Again, no idea what that means, but it's Aaron Stevens. As we've learned after watching him on this show for many months now, I don't really know what half the shit he's involved with means. After that, we had the Hex defending their women's tag titles against a team of Kenzie Page and whoever her partner was. I think they said her name was Ella Envy, something like that. And I think I've made a passing joke about this before, but yes, for some obscure reason, this company has women's tag belts. I guess because WWE has them, the NWA feels obligated to have them too. Even though WWE has no semblance of an actual female tag division, I guess you could say the same thing can be said for the NWA too. I think my new go-to to describe mediocre to adequate matches is by using the term mid, and that's probably the most accurate description I can give this match. The girls in the pink look pretty sloppy for most of it. Their bumping and selling look particularly horrible. So naturally, as I'm criticizing their ring skill, they ended up winning the belt in this match. The finish saw one of the girls bring in a belt, but the referee Jeremy Fritz grabbed it from her. So while his back was turned, she kicked Marty Bell in the vagina, hit her with a move, and pinned her. Whatever. I still have no idea why this company needs women's tag belts to begin with. I mean, we rarely ever see them defended, so quite honestly, they could toss those belts in the trash behind the scenes and I probably wouldn't even notice. Up next was Homicide versus PJ Hawx for the junior heavyweight title. It's funny, right at the beginning of this match, the announcers were talking about the guys Homicide has already wrestled and defended the belt against, and they are name-dropping guys like Rhett Titus, Doug Williams, Austin Aries, and Colby Corino. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here going, I kind of wish Homicide was wrestling one of those guys on this show. No, instead, he's wrestling PJ Hawx. And nothing against PJ Hawx. He's a fine athlete. I've watched several of his matches in the NWA, but I mean, if you're comparing him to guys like Doug Williams or Austin Aries, like, come on now. Which one would be the pay-per-view caliber match? I can't believe Homicide is 45 years old, man. Like, I mentioned before how I was never his biggest fan in the world, but to think back to all the crap that guy's put his body through over the years, and he's still going out there and wrestling at a high level like that, mad respect to him. Generally, I would say the match was all right. PJ kind of had that clean-shaven underdog babyface look that does make him a sympathetic character when he's getting worked over, so thought he did a nice job selling throughout the match. You know, Homicide stuff looked good. He ended up going over with that cop killer vertebraker deal, which all these years later, I still cringe every time I see it. I remember seeing Shane Helms do that in WCW in like the late 90s, and the first time I ever saw it, I legitimately shit myself. But we weren't done with all this, because directly after the match, Outrun the Fixers to lay the boots to both guys. Somewhere in here, Luke Hawx and Ricky Morton and his son Kerry Morton ran down to make the big save. It's always great seeing Ricky Morton, and I had no idea he was training his son Kerry. I'd like to keep an eye on him and see the progress he's making, because, well, if Ricky Morton's training him, I can assure you he's teaching him all the right things. But, well, this whole afterbirth angle was done so he could set up Colby Corino coming out for his Phantom Money in the Bank cash-in, even though he didn't have a physical briefcase or a contract of any kind. No official documentation to set up this impromptu title match on live pay-per-view. He brought out an official with him, and then Kyle Davis nonchalantly says Colby is cashing in his championship opportunity. And yes, he indeed used the words championship opportunity, which I kind of farted at. So then we get the impromptu junior heavyweight title match between Colby and Homicide. It was at this point in the show where I determined that Velvet Sky's commentary sounds like a D-level Lifetime movie acting. And I remember I had just reviewed a match between Colby and Homicide on one of the Powerrr tapings just a couple weeks back, praising how much I enjoyed that match. Well, this one I didn't enjoy as much. Not because anything they did was bad necessarily, but I did not like the layout of this match at all. First of all, not only was Homicide coming off a semi-competitive title match just several minutes prior, but he was also brutally attacked by two large men just seconds afterwards, and by the time we got the opening bell to this match, not only was Homicide already fighting back on Corino and pretty much no-selling any effects from the previous match, but he was actually winning on Colby for about 50% of the match. And I'm going to get more to my complaints about the outside ring brawling in some of the latter segments, because there was plenty of it on the show, but this is where I first really took issue with it. In the first 3 minutes of this match, Homicide and Corino are just fighting outside the ring, and it ends up spilling to the top of the entrance stage where Homicide gives Corino a snap suplex on the stage. Keep in mind, while they're fighting around the ring and up the entryway to the staging area, I think I've mentally reached the count of 70 or 80 in terms of how many seconds have passed since the match should have been ended via countout. So, eventually it does bleed back into the ring, and it all leads up to a very questionable finishing sequence. Remember when I said that the first time I ever saw the cop killer, I shit myself? Well, Homicide gave Colby the cop killer right on top of his head and neck, folded him up like an accordion, and on top of screaming to the top of my lungs, I also shit myself again. And then Corino just kicked out. Why? I don't know. He took the perfect bump for it, sold it like he was dead, and then for no reason at all, he kicked out at 2, which signaled to me right then and there, oh, okay, so Colby's clearly winning this match. Apparently not. So Homicide's spending like a minute trying to get Colby to his feet, but of course he's all spaghetti legs after taking the cop killer. Eventually, Corino gets a shot in on Homicide with a super kick, and then within seconds after that, Homicide just decks Corino with a clothesline, stacks him up, and pins him to retain the belt with a flash pin. So why exactly did Carino kick out of the cop killer then? I don't know. The booking of the second match in particular, I was not a fan of at all, but if you watch the entire thing in a vacuum and you're a moves guy, it's obviously what they were going for. They were trying to book Homicide and God Mode Active by essentially working 2 matches in one show and coming out on top on both occasions. It was effective for what they were going for. I personally would have laid the matches out differently, but that's just me. Then we had Taya Valkyrie in her debut against Natalia Markova. And I think I've touched on Taya's work a little bit. I remember she was in NXT for a cup of coffee, and to my recollection, I don't think they ever did much of anything with her. I think she may have been in Impact at one point too, but that was probably long past the point of me giving up on that product. So my exposure to seeing Taya's work is extremely limited. I mean, people rave about her all the time. She's got a decent look, a little thick in the thigh region for my liking, but her stuff didn't look bad. A little sluggish at times with her offense, but she wasn't necessarily working with a Serena Deeb or a Thunder Rosa. And, she's not as fluid as those girls, but I keep her around for future tapings. Of course, Taryn Terrell being out there always detracts from the match because she's just insufferably bad. But if we're trying to examine the match layout, it was very clunky at times. Once again, way too much fighting on the outside to the point where it well exceeds the 10 count. I'm all for leniency when it comes to countouts in wrestling matches, but there's also a point where the floor brawling becomes so excessive, you may as well just announce the damn thing as no countouts because they spend more time fighting outside the ring than inside the ring. These referees in the business today just suck. They suck! Taya losing kind of pissed off the live crowd. Probably because they know who she is and they see that she has some potential, whereas Markova is not all that good. Overall, I just say this match really didn't need to happen on the pay-per-view. I mean, they could have done this on TV and it would probably served as a better spot. There were way too many girls matches on this show to begin with. Chris Adonis versus Jax Dane for the National Heavyweight title. Kind of the epitome of the match on the card that's just there. I continue to assert that Chris Adonis is all look and no oomph. He's blander than drywall. He's got great genetics, great body, great facial definition. He definitely works out and hits the tanning bed. But he's just got the personality of an Undertaker. No, I don't mean Mark Calloway, not the Undertaker. I mean an actual Undertaker that deals with cremating dead bodies. It was a fine enough match. Much like the TV title match, which we'll get to momentarily, this was mostly built around an injury angle of Dane working over Adonis' hand. They did an angle about midway through where Adonis brought in a chair to have Dane sit down so he could put him in the master lock. A gimmick that Chris was doing in WWE like 15 years ago, and it was old back then. And here he is in 2022 doing the exact same thing. Dane won with the clothesline. Really don't have anything to comment beyond that. We had a pretty bittersweet skit with Aaron Stevens and Mae Valentine. The opening match was billed as Stevens' last swan song, which again indicated to most people that he was either retiring or stepping away from the business for a little bit. Judging how this promo went down, I'd presume the former. The gist of the promo was that he has spent years trying to make the most out of his career and be the top guy, and every time he came close to sniffing the opportunity to be a world champion, it never happened. Thanks for that one, Cena. And he basically says that it's gone to a point where he's accepted the fact that he's never going to be the guy, and instead of chasing opportunities that he knows are never going to come to light, better to just see the writing on the wall and move on to pursue other dreams and ambitions. It's a fucking phenomenal promo. It's the best promo I've ever heard Aaron cut in his entire wrestling career. And then you think about it for 3 seconds, and you realize 3 weeks ago on the Powerrr tapings, Aaron Stevens was in a skit with May Valentine where he said he was going to Brazil, Italy, wherever it was. He was going on a round trip across the country, and he basically outright told May to piss off because she wanted to go with him, and he said no. And all of a sudden, here she is interviewing Aaron like nothing ever happened. Hey, I know I'm old. I know I can easily gloss over or forget things on wrestling shows, especially in today's modern product where everything sucks and I just kind of watch it and move on and forget about it the minute it's over. I promise you, I did not forget about Aaron Stevens being a dick to May Valentine for absolutely no reason. So, plot holes, guys. Just small attention to detail, you know? You might want to be on top of that more often. Then we had Sion versus Tom Latimer, which was a damn good match. Grassroots, old school NWA pro wrestling at its finest, and I loved it. You know, Tom Latimer is a guy that's been around for years. I watched him in TNA when he was mostly doing the hardcore stuff, which I wasn't too fond of at the time. Dude's a heck of a pro wrestler. He looks fantastic. He's got the body. Everything he does looks so smooth. He takes his stuff seriously. Oh, I know I jokingly mentioned the phantom babyface turn off camera. The more I watch him work as a face in his matches, kind of dig what he's doing. I don't think I've ever seen Latimer as a babyface before, but he works that style well. He sells well. He feeds well. His comebacks always look good. He gets the crowd into what he's doing. I could totally go for seeing more of Latimer as a babyface. And now that we've established that Sion's a heel, coming off that angle from last week's Powerrr with him helping Tyrus attack Mims, you know, Sion's matches at least make a little more sense in terms of structure. Personally, I don't agree with beating him in his first match as a heel, but, you know, Latimer's at least a big enough name on the show where I can look past it. Plus, he ended up tying in with the main event anyway, so he kind of had to go over here to establish what they were setting up for later on. But I thought these guys click well together. I guess if I'm trying to find something to nitpick about the match itself, the only question I have is, why are these guys wrestling on the pay-per-view when they haven't had any interaction on the TV show? I mean, unless I missed something, I don't ever recall Latimer or Sion being involved in any segments together. So, booking this match just kind of felt random. Beyond that, though, I can't find much fault with anything they did. Then we had the TV title match with Mims and Tyrus. And as someone that's taken note of a lot of Tyrus's criticism, especially in the YouTube chat during the Powerrr reruns on Friday nights, I get it. If you go in acknowledging the fact that Tyrus is borderline immobile, you can probably find things to enjoy about his matches. For me, Tyrus is mostly sizzle without the steak. And by that, I mean he's a great personality, good talker, he knows how to get heat from the crowd, he works like a heel should, but it also lends itself to a ring style that's generally boring to watch. Now, I, for one, am okay with that because I'm old school and I've watched a good amount of big lumbering heel matches. You know, guys like King Kong Bundy, Yokozuna, Andre the Giant, great talents, great workers like that. I grew up with that, so it works for me. But I also recognize that a lot of their offense is clubbing blows and stomps and holds, and especially in today's era where everything's more fast-paced. Is it exciting to watch? Not really. But if we're going by the traditional standards of what heels are supposed to be in wrestling, they're not supposed to be exciting. So, for the story they were going for here, the match made perfect sense. You know, Mims was a good, sympathetic babyface. Tyrus worked over his shoulder. Mims tried to fight valiantly from underneath, but ended up getting overwhelmed in the end. I don't think Tyrus retaining was all that shocking. And, you know, they got more heat on Tyrus after the match when him and Black G's helped Mims up. They did the little fake out with the show of respect, but Tyrus clubbed him from behind and then started mocking the fans with shaking his hips, being a total douche. Of course, Velvet, playing the simultaneous role of best and worst commentator in the history of professional wrestling, calls every single swerve the moment before it happens. She is hilarious whenever she gets mad, though. When Tyrus decked Mims with that clothesline and Velvet was at the desk screaming bullshit, I popped. It's hideous acting because I don't buy for a second that Velvet could actually get pissed about anything in her entire life, but it is probably the most believable thing she does, pretending to be angry at the bad guys. We had La Rebellion in the Commonwealth Connection for the tag titles. That's Doug Williams and David Hart Smith, for those of you who don't know who the Commonwealth Connection are. Love watching those two guys work, especially Doug Williams. He's not the smoothest worker in the world anymore, and he's definitely starting to get up there in age, but I'd say he's still better than about 80% of the young boys in the business today. If I were running a wrestling company, I'd be using Williams on my show for enhancement matches or undercard matches any chance I got. At least his shit looks like actual pro wrestling. I did like the random camera cut early on in this match where one of the La Rebellion guys was getting tagged in, and the camera took that moment to cut to a shot of absolutely nothing. It is a shot on the outside of the ring where there's an equipment guy standing by the ring apron. Apparently whatever he was doing was more riveting than what was happening in the ring. Another very good match, though. It's weird because I'm almost 100% positive that both teams were babyfaces in this match, which is kind of sketchy when you try to pull this stuff off unless you got the right guys to do it with. The people loved just about everything Williams and Smith did, but they were the ones working over the champions for a good bit before La Rebellion made their big comeback at the end. Things did get a little messy there toward the end once things kind of broke down, especially Williams. I think he got exhausted. Kind of seemed like they weren't on the same page with the transitions, but it didn't detract from the match in any significant manner. I will say this. La Rebellion needs a new finish. That powerbomb backstabber combo they always do looks fucking atrocious every time they do it. They never time it right. And to be honest with you, I don't know how you can even execute a move like that. Because even if they execute it properly, they're basically relying on the one guy to powerbomb the opponent onto the other partner's knees, which would completely shatter the guy's knees anyway. So it's just a stupid move. Just stick with the basics, guys. Don't get overly creative with dumb gymnastic moves. But they went with a title change here, which I thought was really surprising. I had figured they were setting up the Briscoes to be the ones to win the straps when they showed up, but the title change does make sense. I did not watch the entire Crockett Cup this year, but I guess in one of the prelim matches, Williams and Smith actually pinned La Rebellion to advance in the brackets. So I guess that was kind of like the central story going into the match here. And, if that sets up the Briscoes versus Williams and Smith for a future taping or a pay-per-view, totally down for that. Hopefully by that point, Tony will let FTR go because Lord knows those guys are ever going to get a fair shake where they're working right now. Honestly, I don't even know why Dax and Cash are still there. Maybe for the paycheck, but you ask me, I think they'd be better off here in the NWA wrestling some of the better teams instead of being involved with Orange fucking Cassidy and all his outlaw bullshit. We had Kylan King and Camille for the Women's Championship, which was a title match going in that definitely interested me. It's probably one of the better title programs they've done for Camille. And Kylan did a solid little promo before her title match. Sounded a little wooden in delivery, but I bought how much the match meant to her. And she basically established the story for the match, how Kylan's been training every day in preparation, meanwhile Camille's been blowing her off on social media and focusing more on her honeymoon with Latimer. So they thoroughly planted the idea here that Kylan could actually beat Camille, even though I think most people figured she wasn't, that Camille was retaining. Good to see Bully Ray back on commentary for this. At first, I was very confused as to why Bully was there, but as it turns out, he's actually been training both Camille and Kylan. I guess they're his students, and he did a nice job putting them both over on commentary. This is probably the biggest spot for Kylan since she started working with the company, so it's definitely going to be a big test to put her on a bigger stage to see if she can hang with some of that upper mid-card talent. You know, anybody that watches my reviews consistently, you know how honest I am about women's wrestling. And I've been on record talking about it all the time. I've always enjoyed women's wrestling when it's good, but when it's bad, I don't hold back from it. And especially when it comes to AEW's company, you've heard me rant and rave plenty of times about how bad their women's roster is. So going into this review here, I want you to know that I'm not biased against women's wrestling in any way because I've talked about it before. When it's good, I enjoy it. And when it's bad, I hate it. It's as simple as that. I thought both girls did a tremendous job here. They worked hard. Their shit looked believable. We had a clear-cut babyface and heel. And they really milked the story of how important this match was for Kylan. And I've talked about it before. It's probably one of the more credible women's title matches we've seen for Camille. You know, Kylan's got size to her. And while a lot of the match was centered around the power move game, since it's already kind of in Camille's wheelhouse anyway, I thought their styles blended really nice with each other. So this is a really good pairing. Was it the cleanest match from start to finish? No, probably not. But the people were into it. There was drama here. And when you got the people hooked, you can look past the not so great stuff. Per women's standards, this went well above my expectations. And I'll go ahead and say it. I like this match a lot more than the Serena Deeb Thunder Rosa match from the Double or Nothing show. I thought this flowed better. There was more emotion and story that went into this. I even dug the little face-off with Camille and Max the Impaler after the match. Like I said a couple weeks back when I got a glimpse of her for the first time, took one look at Max the Impaler. She's got a great fucking look. If there's anyone that should be beating Camille for the belt, it's her. And you know, Kylan really won me over with her performance in this match. I hate using the term performance when I'm talking about wrestling, but you know what I mean. Hopefully they don't drop the ball with her, because if they're going to keep her around for a while longer, they could get more mileage out of her on future shows. She's probably somebody that AEW is going to be scouting in the next year or so, and if she keeps training and improving, she'll be a real solid addition to the women's sport in the next several years. I could see someone like her going somewhere. And things kept rolling along great here with an appearance from Dr. Tom Pritchard. What a great sighting. I always love watching Dr. Tom in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. You talk about a truly underrated tag team that doesn't get brought up enough in wrestling discussions. Dr. Tom Pritchard and the Gigolo Jimmy Del Rey. Or I guess in earlier incarnations, you could say Dr. Tom and Stain Lane prior to 93. The Heavenly Bodies. What a phenomenal team. Of course, I'm not just saying that because Corny managed them. He really didn't say a lot in this whole promo, other than just thanking the fans for supporting real professional wrestling, which I certainly won't poo-poo that statement. It's not the National Wrestling Alliance of the 80s that I grew up watching and admiring, but it's certainly more real than whatever the fuck AEW or WWE are presenting to the public. But, yeah, nice surprise. Yeah, NWA is really good at dishing out the surprise guests for these shows. I think last time they did one of their bigger pay-per-view events, wasn't it Jazz that came out for a special appearance to do a promo? It's always good to see the legends. You know, even if it's just to come in for a cup of coffee, do some plugs, and thank the fans. And the main event. Boy, was this a WWE segment at its finest. Remember the good old days of the never-ending show-opening monologues that just droned on and on for an eternity and felt like they never ended? Well, that's basically what this was, except it was on a pay-per-view. All right. There's a lot of ground to cover with this whole thing, so guess I'll just start from the beginning. So going in, I didn't really know what the status of Matt Cardona's injury was. We've been hearing on the Powerrr shows that he had gotten hurt at one of those outlawed GCW events, but to what extent the severity of the injury went, that was still kind of up in the air. But we did hear that he was going to be at the show. So he comes out with his crew here, and his arm is in a sling, and he's also dressed in street clothes. So, I mean, at this point, the jig was kind of up. And he got in there and actually cut one hell of a little promo. He essentially turned himself babyface, which I don't know if that was intentional or not, but the main gist of his promo was that the whole idea of the Alwayz Ready pay-per-view was named after him, and he was pissed that he had to relinquish the belt. Said he worked for 19 years to be a world champion, and now it's all being stripped from him at one of the worst possible points in his career. I believe he said prognosis for his recovery from his bicep surgery is 3 to 5 months, which doesn't sound right at all. Normally, recovery time for an injury like that is much longer than 5 months, and 3 is really pushing it. Unless your name is John Cena and you're just a freak of nature. I did get a chuckle out of the couple fans that tried to start a "You're not ready" chant while Cardona was talking. Wish they would have gotten more people to get on board with that. I also think I heard one person scream, "Cody would have wrestled." Just twisting that knife further into the jugular. Anyway, so Billy Corgan finally comes out and does the Billy Corgan thing, looking very awkward and not like somebody who should be an authority figure on camera. God, who does that remind you of? And he's in there trying to get Cardona to hand the belt over. Eventually, that brings out Nick Aldis to cut a promo. And I've always talked about how good promo Aldis is, and this is right up there in terms of good material. It did come off a little condescending at times, and as I noted earlier with Cardona's promo, like, his material ended up turning him babyface there by the end. So at first I thought they were going for some kind of like double turn deal here. And remember when I was alluding to the WWE show opening promo comment from earlier? Well, it ended up following the exact same format as we get layered entrances of Trevor Murdoch, Tom Latimer, and the former Dexter Loomis of NXT fame, now going by his former ring name, Sam Shaw. And as far as I know, he's still doing the exact same gimmick and practically wearing the exact same gear he was wearing in WWE. So it's almost like nothing has changed about him at all since he got fired from the company. And at the point all 4 guys were in there just standing around, the segment was about 15 minutes old. Latimer did a promo on Corgan, basically mocking him for the fact that he never saw him as a main eventer, but now tonight he's going to prove that he belongs in that top spot. So much for my comments about him being a babyface going forward, right? Long story short, Corgan books an impromptu 4-way for the belt. He manages to get it from Cardona, who pouts off very distraught. And his crew kind of followed shortly thereafter. Never saw them again. And finally, after 25 interminable minutes of talk, and more talk, we get the opening bell for Aldis versus Murdoch versus Latimer versus Shaw with 10 seconds build. And within moments of the opening bell, what do we get? Crowd brawling. Because that is exactly what we used to see in the good old days with NWA main event world title matches. Remember the time Dusty and Flair fought amongst the crowd for 10 straight minutes? Or how about that legendary time where Flair and Steamboat fought in the crowd for an eternity? Or, one of my personal favorites, Dory Funk Jr. versus Jack Briscoe, 1974 at the Civic Center. Remember, they did that memorable crowd brawling spot? I should write a book on how to be a facetious prick. I'd sell millions. The match itself probably could have been all right if it wasn't preceded with an unending 20-minute promo segment, and I was already kind of over the show by this point. But, I mean, I guess I should have figured the four-way was going to be a bad idea because, as I've stated ad nauseum for as long as I can remember, I hate multi-man matches. I hate them. I hate them. I hate them. I hate them. They're never any good. There's no fluidity or coherency to anything. It's guys doing spots. And, even with guys like Trevor and Latimer and Aldis in there, I'm sorry, even those guys couldn't piece together a good four-way. It wasn't awful. I've seen worse multi-person matches, but I don't care what company's doing them. Whether it's AEW, WWE, NWA, I'm over 3-ways and 4-ways and 5-ways and pretty much any match that's not a standard singles or tag match. And, even looking past the crowd brawling and the fighting outside, they do every trope in the multi-person spots. The stacked up stupid plex being one of my favorite quotes to steal from Brian Alvarez. Of course, we had that at one point. We had the usual deal where it's two guys fighting in the ring and doing stuff while the other two guys are either laying or hiding outside the ring waiting for their cue to run in to do their sequence of spots. So formulaic and bullshit. And Sam Shaw, Dexter Loomis, whatever he's calling himself now. Like I said, he's still basically doing the same character he was doing in NXT, which worked for that brand because it fit the mold of the weird cast of characters they had going at the time. But again, it's the same thing I always complain about with all the undercard guys on the roster. I don't like the goofy comedy characters and the outlaw gimmicks. It doesn't work in this product. And Dexter Loomis doing the Jeffrey Dahmer serial killer gimmick in the NWA, just no. Just please don't. So, in a nutshell, it was a guys doing a lot of stuff kind of match. It happened, and I forget virtually everything that happened in the match the second it was over. The whole thing went way too long, but as far as the decision of putting the belt back on Trevor, I mean, I don't hate the idea. I always thought they could have gotten a little more mileage out of him during his first title reign before they had him drop the strap to Cardona, but this kind of gives him a chance to course correct a little bit and ride that wave again. I am still really interested to see where the Pope lines up with all this because if y'all remember, they were teasing some stuff with him and Trevor for a little bit. And I guess him winning the strap here kind of ties in with that promo that Pope did on Powerrr a few weeks back where he was basically telling him to dig deep and bring back the fighting spirit that we saw during the first title reign. They were alluding to the heel turn with him for a little bit. They never went all the way with it, so I mean, there's a whole different variety of directions they could go with it. Maybe Trevor turns heel down the road. They do him and Pope for the belt. That would make sense. I'm also still kind of holding out hope that the eventual game plan is to put the strap on Pope because it's something I would like to see. And the dude's fucking earned it. And he's one of the best babyface promos on the show, outside maybe Nick Aldis. Overall, it's hard to grade the show as a whole because a lot of it was kind of hit and miss throughout. I definitely would say it peaked at the women's title match, and looking back, that probably turned out to be my favorite match on the entire show, because that was a damn fine match. The promo stuff at the end, I mean, it was all right. The guys had good material, but goddamn, too long. It was almost kind of reminiscing about those show opening Triple H promos from like the mid-2000s where he'd show up on Raw every night and cut like a droning, monotonous promo for 20 minutes that put me to sleep halfway through it. I mean, this is starting to approach that territory with what they did here. And of course, the Cardona injury really threw things out of whack with their initial plans, but I mean, even so, there are so many more effective ways to format that main event. I mean, you wanted to get to the eventual four-way, fine, but slice off a chunk of the dialogue and cut the actual length of the match in half, and maybe you would have had me for a bulk of it. But, having that entire main event segment basically go the entire length of the hour, too much. Too much. Kind of like how most pay-per-views are in wrestling these days. Whether it's WWE, AEW, NWA, whatever Outlaws running some kind of big event, it doesn't matter. For some ungodly reason, every company feels they need to do this 4-hour extravaganza. And, particularly for this show, like, was that really needed? Couldn't you just cut the whole show in half? I mean, there was a lot of fine wrestling on the card, but dragging it out to 4 hours, like, you didn't need to go there. And especially, too, it's like a couple of these matches that we're talking about here, like, none of them had any build-up. They were just kind of randomly booked there. So, little gripes aside, that's my long-winded discussion of the Alwayz Ready show. I said I was going to give you a Cliff's Notes rundown, and I gave you a fucking 30-minute tangent about it, but whatever. I just had a lot of notes about it, so I figured I may as well just run it all down now. Solid wrestling pay-per-view. I probably say you don't have to go out of your way to watch it. I would highly recommend checking out the Camille Kylan King match if you are looking for something on the show to check out. But aside from that, it's not really worth going out of your way to see. Like I said, solid pro wrestling pay-per-view that went way too long. And that'll bring us to the season premiere of NWA Powerrr for season 9, I guess. It's still really weird to call these shows by season instead of dates like I'm used to with every other show, but it does make things easier to archive since I watch them on delay several days after they air on Fight TV, so I get why they do it. And the show opened with, quite the trip down memory lane. Not a memory that I particularly wanted to be reminded of, but hearing the name of the group being re-uttered made me realize just how much of TNA's past I completely wiped from my memory book. So the show begins with Kyle Davis welcoming Bully Ray out for a promo. And while Bully's coming out shaking everyone's hand, it also meant that he was going to have to engage with Velvet Sky at the commentary booth. Yeah. Well, for those of you that may not know, I believe Bubba and Velvet were involved at one point or another, and they had broken things off not that long ago. Let's just say, when Velvet had to shake Bully's hand, she knew how awkward that situation was. And, well, she expressed it. Let's just say that. Anyway, so Bubba does a brief little spiel on getting the crowd to chant NWA, and that immediately prompts Mike Knox and VSK to come out. And if there continues to be one thing on this show that boggles my mind every time I see it, it's this company's strange fascination with wanting to give Mike Knox promo time. I don't get it. He's not particularly good at it, but lo and behold, it feels like every week on this show, they're giving Mike Knox a microphone. So he starts putting over Bully and talking about the roads they've traveled up and down together. They're kind of doing the little friendly reunion shtick for a minute or two. And then Knox ends up turning the whole thing on its face by essentially shooting on Bully about the fact that he's a fraud, he's a phony, he's a cancer to the business, he spits in the face of all the boys, and how he's burned every bridge he's come across with the friends he's made. All the while I keep wondering to myself, where exactly is this all coming from, and why the hell is Mike Knox pissed at Bubba Ray Dudley, of all people? I don't think I recall them ever interacting in WWE. They certainly never feuded, to my recollection. And it was pretty soon after that where Knox dropped the forbidden 3 words of the wrestling annals that I never wanted to hear again. I actually completely forgot about the whole group entirely until it was mentioned. Aces and eights. And I said, oh, fuck. Oh, yes. Who could forget about the NWO knockoff biker gang from TNA Wrestling back in like the mid-2010s, where a bunch of guys in masks showed up on Impact and wreaked havoc on the roster for like a year straight. But they never won any matches. The entire group was filled with a bunch of job guys. Wasn't Eric Bischoff's geek son a part of that whole stable at one point? The whole storyline was garbage from the jump, and the longer it went on, the more it turned viewers off from the show entirely because it went on for fucking ever, and everyone that was associated in that group was dragged down as a result. So yeah, Knox brought that up again. Because if y'all remember, wasn't Bully Ray the leader of that group or something? I don't remember what Knox's role was, but I'm like 90% sure that everyone was given function names in the group to make it seem like they were a bigger deal than they really were. The whole thing was garbage. So, yeah, Knox's whole deal is that Bully left the group high and dry, left his teammates to flounder and piss in the wind while he went on to sign a Legends contract with WWE or whatever. And to be honest, I don't even remember what the hell happened with that Aces and Eights story. Didn't they just kind of like unceremoniously drop the whole thing with no rhyme or reason and pretend like the whole thing never happened? Kind of like the same thing they did with the Immortal faction when Hogan and Bischoff were running the company. Oh, TNA. Good times. I had to get a subscription to whatever Impact streaming service is just to go back and watch some of those shows. Maybe we could add that to the retro part. Me just going back to TNA from 2005 whenever they debuted on Spike TV and just going through all the archives of the television shows. Oh, God. We'll see. I might have to give up on AEW before I subject myself to that torture again. Anyway, I'm just going to cut to the chase here because I'm spending way more time on this than necessary. So Bubba apologized for all his wrongdoings, said he's sorry he disrespected him in any way, and he extends his hand to Knox, but Knox sucker punches him, and then him and VSK put Bubba through a table, and we never heard about him for the rest of the show. So now I guess we have to look forward to a Mike Knox Bully Ray program. Wow. Exhilarating television. So that whole thing was wacky and bizarre. And speaking of wacky and bizarre, we got this trippy as fuck video pre-tape with Trevor Murdoch from earlier in the day. And, well, first off, he is cutting a promo in an empty arena with a live mic. He's also in his ring gear for some strange reason. And while he's talking, he is also looking into the hard cam, which for some reason is filming this little dealia bob. Meanwhile, there's absolutely nobody in the building to film the thing anyway, unless they just happen to have one single camera guy there to film the promo. And I don't know, I think he was asking for people to donate to like the local food bank or something. Anyway, while he's talking, in walks one of the ill-begotten guys. I think it was Rush Friedman. And he's pissed at Trevor for some reason. I have no clue why. And then all of a sudden, he starts yelling at Trevor, saying if he disrespects him, his older brother is going to come in and give him a good ass whooping. And of course, the big swerve here is that Friedman's older brother is a guy that's probably no taller than 5'5". He's probably 140 pounds soaking wet. So Trevor kills both of them, lays out Friedman with the sky-high powerbomb, and then he just kind of leaves in complete silence while Friedman rolls around the ring in pain. I've got nothing with this. As God is my witness, I'm just recapping what I saw. So then we had a Matt Cardona Chelsea Green promo. By the way, Mae Valentine is just back doing interviews on this show. So whatever rumor that was about her being gone from the company, not coming to terms with a contract agreement or something, I guess that got resolved because here she is. And after hearing Cardona basically lay out that whole promo on the pay-per-view, talking about how angry he was about being injured and not being able to defend the world title, May's question to Cardona is, and I quote, "What are your thoughts?" Yet another WWE-ism that always gets under my skin. Backstage interviewers asking dumb fucking generic questions. It never ceases to piss me off. Anyway, he reiterated a lot of what he said on the pay-per-view, and then Chelsea Green said that they have not forgotten what Billy Corgan told them in the ring before he took the belt away from Matt. And what did he say? Well, we're not sure exactly. Presumably, it's something that the Cardonas will be stewing on until Cardona heals up and is ready to come back. We had Luke Hawx doing a scathing promo on Homicide and dropping goddams every other line. I don't know. It wasn't a really good promo. That's all you need to know. And then we got our first match for the show, and it's Taya Valkyrie back in action. Probably looking to give her a win back after losing at the pay-per-view in her debut, which is still a very questionable booking decision. And, of course, she's wrestling Taryn Terrell. And while I would like to see more of Taya's work to gain more of an opinion on her skill and ability, I am not subjecting myself to a Taryn Terrell match. If you've watched my NWA reviews before, you know the rule that I've implemented. The social distance rule. So, hopefully I'll get a better Taya match to scout next time when she wrestles someone who isn't actively trying to make a mockery of the wrestling business. Then Natalia Markova did a promo, basically saying that she doesn't need Taryn as a side piece. Alright. So why did she accompany Natalia at the pay-per-view then? Then we had a Kylan King promo, following up on her match with Camille. Elise May had some better questions for Kylan this go-around instead of the "what are your thoughts" cliche. Once again, though, I thought this was a real solid promo from Kylan. She sounds authentic. She said that it was a disappointing loss, but even though she came up short, her goal is to get back on track for another title shot. I dig her vibe. Like I said before, I hope they don't lose momentum with her because she had a really good, strong showcase against Camille, and I'd hate to see them back off of her when she's got the potential. And she even kind of has some of the backing support from the fans, so ride that wave of momentum, guys. Don't let that die down. And then we had Mike Knox and VSK versus the apparent one-night reunion of Strictly Business, Tom Latimer and Chris Adonis. Even though I'm pretty sure this group broke up because they were all pissed at one another. Or maybe it was Latimer who was pissed at Nick Aldis and Chris Adonis was kind of along for the ride. In any case, they're teaming again. Considering this was the only match I watched on this episode, I guess it's easy enough to say it was the best match on the show. Joking aside, it was a fine main event. Very basic stuff from all four guys. Got the heat on Adonis. Did the big double down spot with Knox and Adonis to set up the hot tag for Latimer. Ended up breaking down with all four guys at the end. And the finish was Knox getting caught in the master lock in the corner so that Latimer could slide in and hit VSK with the pop-up powerbomb for the 3. I still would like to know who the fuck VSK is and why he's a member of the Matt Cardona family, but that's just me. As for the reunion of Latimer and Adonis, okay. Again, I'm going to echo what I said at the pay-per-view recap about Latimer. I would prefer seeing him do a singles run as a babyface instead of being saddled back in the tag division. I mean, he's perfectly fine in that role, but I'm more on board with trying to expand with guys' abilities beyond the tag division. And Latimer is somebody that's proven he can work on his own. And Adonis, I can kind of take or leave at this point. He doesn't really do a whole lot for me. But Latimer, for sure, I would like to see that guy get a singles push at some point. Show itself was pretty skippable. Unless you have some strange yearning to hear Mike Knox reminisce about a failed D- level faction from TNA almost a decade ago. You really don't need to go out of your way to watch this. It was mostly just promo recaps of the pay-per-view, which is perfectly fine coming off an event like that. Just hearing the boys and girls talking about their matches and reflecting on things. I mean, that's usually what you want to do post-pay-per-view. Wink, wink, AEW. Anyway, I'm about done here. I'm done, Gus. We're tapping out with this one. Thanks for watching this installment of the FSWR podcast. Again, we will be back this coming Friday for more fun with the Retro Review series. We'll also see what fun and joy AEW brings us with their weekly installment of Crash TV entertainment. I should start keeping a tally of how many things they actually follow up on in a given week, because I'm sure if I actually broke things down, I would find that in an entire 2-hour broadcast, guaranteed there's probably less than 3 things that are actually touched on in a recap from the previous week's show. And if they are, they're glossed over so quickly they may as well have just not recapped the thing at all. But we'll save the ranting for Friday. I'm going to save the energy because I'm going to need it. Take care, all. Peace.